Welcome to Know Your Options, the Measured Risk Podcast.
The ultimate guide to navigating the volatile nature of the markets while managing risk purposefully.
Join us as we challenge the theory behind traditional asset allocation and dive into the mathematics of investing.
Whether you are a seasoned investor or just starting out,
this podcast offers valuable insights and practical advice to help you make informed decisions and manage your money wisely.
So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and let's dive into the world of calculated risks together.
Well, good day, everybody. This is Larry Kriesmer with the Know Your Options podcast. I'm here with my business partner, Bernard Surovsky, and
Hello.
a special guest today. Thank you, Bernard.
Hello.
Special guest today is Fred Saide, and he's with the Money Matters USA advisory firm. He's also a pretty frequent media contributor and podcast host himself, and so we'll be learning more about his experience and development here in the financial services business. So, Fred, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. Excellent. So why don't we start with a little bit of your background? You haven't always been a financial advisor. So let's start with...
No, started out in the teaching world at a number of major universities, and then sidestepped into consulting part-time. When you have the use of graduate students to do some of your research, it's always nice. Effective to do that, and undergraduates to help carry their bags, if you will, and support them. And then from that, I said, you know what, I like this, and so I went into consulting full time. I was very fortunate to be able to be with a couple of large, well-known public firms, and then decided that I had done enough of that and wanted to do something different. And I can't say that I knew immediately exactly what I wanted to do. It was a bit of trial and error to figure it out. And what I found, kind of by accident in a conversation with a friend of mine, that maybe what I ought to be doing is working with people to see if I could help them retire successfully and put a bow on that. And so I said, okay, so how do you do that? And he said, you do it. And it wasn't that simple. I had some very, very good coaches who helped me with that, and went along, and I figured out my own definition of what that is and what is involved in that, and to make myself stand out so I could be different in my community, and wound up also and still do quite a bit of pro bono work. I think it's important to do it. I mean, I don't want to sound silly and say, well, you should give back to the community. Well, I think you should give back to the community, because I think that's you got to live in that area. I work where I live, and I want to enjoy it. And I like walking down the street and being recognized, and even people that I don't know say hello to me. I don't have the foggiest idea who they are.
It reminds me of my youth. I say that happens to me periodically, but for all the wrong reasons.
I'll tell a very short story. I was in an office in another area, and a woman was walking up to the door, I thought, and I recognized her immediately, so I waved at her, and then she sort of looked at me strangely and continued to walk by, and I realized, oh, she's the weathercaster. I see her every day. I can't imagine she didn't recognize me.
That is funny. Apropos of that, when I was a youngster growing up, the fellow next door was the weathercaster on a well-known New York radio station. And one day he went out with his raincoat. My mother called me back and had me, wear a heavy yellow raincoat with rain hat and galoshes. It didn't rain. Must have been 87 degrees. I baked. So I complained to my mother, and then I met him on the street, and I mentioned it to him, and he started laughing hysterically. He said, I was just taking it to the cleaners. Tell your mother to stop watching me so closely.
That's terrible.
Well, that's a great example of good data, bad outcome.
Right.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Or
False
misinterpreted
correlation.
data. Yes, misinterpreted data. I think it's more misinterpreted data.
Exactly.
Not reading the tea leaves correctly. Fred, tell us a little bit about how you made the transition from the academia to advising clients. That seems like quite the transition to make, because academia seems so theoretical, and yet when you introduce people into the equation, there's a whole nother level of management that's required.
That's a good question, and probably the most honest answer is I've never made the full transition because most of my clients are highly analytical.
Okay.
And I enjoy working with them. There's nothing that terrifies me as much as the hard driving executive who says, "Don't bother me with the details. Just give me the overview and where do I sign?" I'm terrified by that kind of person. I can't function with that kind of person. So in a sense, I've never really made the transition. I do get bogged down in the research. I am a huge consumer of high quality research. I know you can't quite see in my office, but you'd laugh if you saw how many books are on my desk on the floor. And one of my professors taught me how do you read, and his answer was, you read the introduction, the preface, chapter 1, the conclusion, and then anything else you need in between to get to it. And he said, on my tombstone, and this is true, on my tombstone, I want something, if necessary, a footstone that says he never read a book. and it's true, he does. There's a footstone, there's a headstone, there's a footstone, and it says exactly that. He never read a book.
Oh my God.
And so I've been through a number of speed reading courses where you put your finger down the center of the page and don't remember anything that you read. Yeah, I've had that experience, but I use that technique all the time, and it allows me to read quite a bit and to cover a lot of ground. And if necessary, I'll go back and look at a chapter or something. That makes me an enormous consumer of high quality academic research, National Bureau of Economic Research, and listen to quite a few podcasts, but I also follow up with written articles or white papers, ebooks, and so on. And there were certain academics that I follow very, very closely because they make the most sense to me. So and I have my own process that I use, and it's not a process that hard driving executive would want. And I have found that people who are just anxious to keep moving, move money and move it fast, that's basically a 3 sessions and a hard close at the end of the third session, and the book you get is about 4 to 5 tabs, and then someone who will go 4 or 5 visits and you get the 5 or 6 tabs. I mean, mine is 6 guaranteed. Frequently we do 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and we do 12 tabs plus a supplement. So you're getting for anybody that works with me is getting a really detailed, comprehensive plan and all these supporting documents that are necessary to validate that plan. And that's the reason for the number of visits, so that each word in the plan is read, discussed. I don't have any fear. I give them the plan, they take it home, beat it up, come back, discuss it, and so on. I mean, we'll move money only when we're satisfied that we know what their goals are, what their aspirations are. I may be unusual, but in our first session, I don't ask them to bring, their financial paperwork. I'm not interested in their financial paperwork at that point. I'm interested in them, or husband, wife, whatever the relationship is. That my meetings run about 2 hours to 2.5 hours. So that's a typical meeting. I don't do 20-minute meetings or 1 hour meeting, and
how about,
makes me different.
Do you screen out any significant number of people that can't handle that, or is it coming to you through referrals where people know what they're getting into, or how does your client base behave?
I have two paraplanners, and we have a younger paraplanner who works with people between $500,000 and about 650 million. I don't work with them. My minimum is $1 million, $1.3 million. That's where I start. I go up to about 10, 12 million, and we stop at that point. Not because we don't think that we can compete with the money management firms. It's just that they have a better story to tell than we do, and their fees are higher. And I guess some people think if they get a choice between a slightly lower fee, which what our fee would be on that amount of money, if they pay more, then they're getting more. It's like the automobile manufacturer has an interchange manual, and if you're buying this car or that car, you're going to pay more for the parts for that car, but you got the parts maybe for the cheaper car that are in there, but you won't know the difference. So that's not a self-serving comment. We as a firm believe, and I believe, because the firm is a reflection of me, that unless you can manage risk, and I don't mean risk in the sense of Markovitz that risk and volatility are the same. I don't. There's a difference between risk and volatility, and we make clear, and I make clear what those distinctions are, and we also make clear that the individual and I take risk tolerance very seriously. We look at risk tolerance and risk capacity. Take that very seriously. This is not document that's made up by the legal department, and I got to show this to you, and they just sign off. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it means a great deal. And portfolios have their own risk as well, and that can be measured, and you can put a risk number on it. And I know that some people would say that if you compare, Monte Carlo failure, with being on an airplane and having a 5% risk or 10% risk of crashing, some people will say, "Oh, that they're not the same." But I think I don't want to take up all the time in this podcast to talk about the weaknesses of Monte Carlo. I think that risk of failure is important, and also to understand what the Monte Carlo scenario is telling you. Well, we do 25,000 iterations per possibility. My understanding through the American College is that if you do less than 5,000, you don't even have a conversation about the possibility of there being any validity to what you're looking at. But that's my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I was taught at the American College. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I was actually more thinking in terms of, does every one of your potential new clients, are they willing to go through that process? I mean, obviously, if they're on meeting 6, the answer is yes.
Some are not. Some will take the draft document and say thank you very much, after the 5th or 6th meeting. And
it might be that they're just reading the introduction and the conclusion.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's not a finished document at that point. But at that point, we will ask them for referrals. We tell them we like referrals. We probably don't ask for enough of them. But at that point, we will then write them and explain where we think they are and what the missings are. And we'll ask them for referrals again and remind them. And when we do events, we will invite them. Some of them come back and eventually do become clients. Some do not. And, we ask them to bring somebody that they don't know, that we don't know, rather. And that's the price of admission. In other words, we're not selling them a ticket for $50, but we're saying, bring a couple that who are friends of yours who, but we don't know, and introduce us to them. And that's an easy way of getting a referral.
I want to go back a little bit to the Monte Carlo discussion. Larry and I, we've been in this industry long enough now, believe it or not, that we've experienced, good markets and bad markets. And it's always struck me as, so obvious in the rearview mirror when that bad crisis comes along and you're like, well, how did people not see that one coming? Be it the housing crisis, be it the .com crisis, be it, again, in hindsight, it's all quite so obvious. I just, I've always wondered about the weakness of back-tested models and about I always have the story about a professor years ago when I was doing my thesis. He said to me, well, what's your conclusion? Go find the data to support it. And that's always reminded me of like back-tested models. And I think Monte Carlo just kind of runs the whole sequence but in the reality of it, of a meltdown, human nature kicks in and people, they lose their grip or sense of reality. Just fear takes over, and fear is such a strong motivator. I think it might be an even stronger motivator than greed in a crisis in particular. How do you overcome or manage the portfolio construction to address some of those concerns?
Well, first of all, from a conceptual point of view, a great deal of time on looking at drawdowns, and not just hypothetical drawdowns or looking at S&P time periods, but actually showing them the impact of drawdowns on the portfolios that they have. And the software that we use will show them what the up is, what the down is in that portfolio. And you're absolutely right. Most of the measures that are used are backward looking, whether it's a Sharpe ratio, whether it's beta, it's all back looking, despite the warning that past performance is not, you fill in the blank. But in fact, it's all backward looking. So one of the ways that I manage risk is through realistic scenario planning. And then we look at how the portfolio would perform if the Federal Reserve, for example, raised rates, or the Federal Reserve contracted the money supply, if China had a recession. I'm just taking these arbitrarily. If the yield curve was inverted. In other words, realistic, not just hypothetical, just realistic scenario planning. How would your current portfolio, the one that you walked in with, how would it perform? And what could it do on the upside? What would it do on the downside? What is it doing right now? So we could establish a range. Then we could look and say, what is the best it's ever done? What is the worst it's ever done? Now, my average client is in their early 60s. They don't have a lot of time left for active accumulation. So limiting the drawdowns becomes very, very important. Now, I can't say that we can do this with absolute precision, but we want to limit drawdowns to about 10 or 11% worst case. Yeah, we're giving up some upside. We're perfectly willing to give up some upside in order to protect on the downside. Now, I agree with you that people feel lashed when they start losing money and they do irrational things. So if losses hurt more than the possibility of a gain, do they value a gain over a loss? Well, you know what the answer to that is. So if we can limit the downside, just buffer that downside and stop it out entirely, then the recovery is not as difficult, doesn't take as long for us, because while they're recovering, nothing is happening other than trying to get back to the starting point.
What are some of the tools do you use to proverbially buffer them out? You were saying, like, from a portfolio construction standpoint, what are you doing?
Well, we use Rextrema. We use their PCT Pro 3 now. I don't know if you're familiar with Rextrema. We love their software.
Riskstreama, and you've got hidden levers and Riskalyze, or is Riskalyze the one that went to?
Yeah, we don't use Riskalyze. For some reason, Riskalyze attacked Riskstreamer a couple of years ago, and they had a pretty fiery exchange. We've always used we like Riskstreamer, and we use Y charts that we find that's quite helpful. And those are the main things. We use Morningstar as well, not as heavily as Y charts, but we use Morningstar more for comparison when people come in with their portfolios. We also use the index standard, and we find that we like the methodology that they use in analyzing indexes and ETFs. I'd say those are the main software that we use. We use some stuff on the annuity side, Morningstar. We also use the index standard. That's probably the main thing. We use some of the Covisum software for tax planning and income planning.
What's been like your biggest surprise or your biggest disappointment when you've either built a portfolio for a client and you've had something happen that you didn't expect? Do you have any stories like that to relate, or not, or nothing really stands out?
Yeah, we absolutely missed beside Apple, we absolutely did not anticipate the impact that technology has had in driving the market. Yeah, we knew about Apple. We knew about NVIDIA. Did not think about Microsoft or Dell so I'd say we missed on that. So when clients are convinced that they have to have diversification, perhaps I'm the redhead in the blondes convention. I'm not a great believer in diversification. Because everybody that has talked about diversification, Benjamin Graham, Paul Samuelson Sr., to take two examples, Buffett, they didn't make their money through diversification. Graham made his money on Coca-Cola, Samuelson on Geico. Diversification is overemphasized, in my opinion. I'm not saying it isn't helpful, but I wouldn't be a slave. I wouldn't be a slave to it, regardless of everything that I read. The other point is when the markets are highly correlated, it's great to talk about the 60-40 portfolio, and from an academic point of view or from an illustration point of view, makes a lot of sense when you're doing an event or what have you. But the truth of the matter is, as I see it, if the 60-40 portfolio is undermined because the market doesn't perform the way the 60-40 portfolio says it ought to perform, then you have to do something else. And sometimes clients leave because I'm not going to be wedded to that. It might be 70-30. It might be 30-70. It might. When people come in and say I'm 100% and I'm willing to lose $4 million. I say go someplace else. I'm not your guy. To me, that's a catastrophic loss if your portfolio is worth $6 million. Let's not overestimate. Depending on your lifestyle. We had somebody come in recently with $1.3 million portfolio, and their spend rate is $26,000 a month, and they weren't going to concede on that even in retirement. So.
They're not going to have a long-lived retirement.
It's going to be 4 or 5 years of super fund retirement.
That's right.
Get that used, aluminum trailer, hitch it up to your big truck, your 8-cylinder monster, and go for it.
There you go. Is there like a common thing that you run into? You've been doing this advising now for 20 years, more? How long has it been?
Yeah, a little over.
20. Is there a common thing you run into in this age group of 60-year-olds, or have they grown up with you? Did your client maybe start out at 45 or 50, and now they're 60?
Some of them have, some of them have not. The question we get asked all the time, There's two questions. The first one you can anticipate: do I have enough money? Can I have enough money? Do I have enough money? Do I need more money? We use the Society of Actuaries longevity calculator. There are others. Penn Wharton has one. I don't use it. I use the longevity illustrator, and we start with the longevity analysis, and then we move there into conversation about their about their income goals, their retirement plans, what they want to do, and then we see what they've got and what they would like to do, what makes sense, and then we can take try to answer the same question that Fibonacci worked with. Do you have enough money? And we will see if you do.
It's interesting too, because your $6 million guy or gal who was willing to lose $4 million. I guess that would be okay if they had like a $26,000 annual spend, because then it wouldn't really impact their spend at all. They can take that kind of risk. So it's interesting to get people's feeling like that. But I have a feeling that on the way from 6 million to 3 million, they have clearly changed their mind on what their risk tolerance is. Do you say you spend a lot of time on a risk tolerance? Is this like a really thorough questionnaire? Do you ask questions forward and backward to try and gauge responses, or how do you press that?
We use psychometric. We use psychometric testing for that, for the risk tolerance, and then more concrete stuff for risk capacity. Because risk capacity is more concrete. So we can pretty well anticipate from the testing what people are going to do. And then in our investment policy statement and in our hard document plan, we spell out with their agreement, and then construct their assets, their portfolios, as well as their income sources, so that they are within this maximum drawdown of, say, 10, but sometimes it could be 11. I mean, it can't be 1,000% exact, but it's pretty much in that range. And when they call and say that that they're hyperventilating, we look and say, drawdown is only 2.5% at this point. So you said you were willing to go to 10. So take it easy at this point. Because we've had this conversation. So don't do anything. And worst comes to worst, it'll be 10%. And, over the next 15, 18 months, you'll get it back. And in the meantime, you're not depending on that for income. So good luck.
I mean, it's interesting, because a year like last year, even the 60-40 portfolios, or the 70% bond, 30% equity bond, I mean, the bonds just got so heavily hit in a year like last year. And yet we look at a year like this year where interest rates have gone up a lot still. And yet the market overall is also up, not insignificantly. I mean, a most unexpected turn of events. And, you were saying earlier how one would expect that with interest rates going up, you'd expect the markets to do this and that. One doesn't reasonably think the markets are going to go up in a rising interest rate environment, I suppose. But here we are. I mean, it's pretty, but to your point about technology, I'm just wondering, do you have any kind of, because I keep thinking about, you have these back-tested models that are going to keep you within that 10% drawdown as an example. But then you have that the world is changing. It just seems to be changing at pace. And I just wonder how valid the back-tested things are with respect to forward-looking events. And, how does one manage that?
Well, we have 4 model portfolios that we use. And we adjust them quarterly, as is appropriate. So we go from conservative to moderate conservative to moderate and then to moderate aggressive. We're never aggressive. If you want to be aggressive, I might agree to have you as an advisory client, but I'm not doing anything for you. You can call me and ask me what this means. What does it do for you? How does it impact? How many Hail Marys do I have in my portfolio? Should I make this move? Should I make that move? What are you reading? I mean, I'll do that. But I don't want to have anything to do with anything that you're doing actively.
When you look at asset allocations, I mean, what assets are you looking at? I mean, I presume you're looking at stocks, bonds, REITs. Is there anything else you're looking at in that overall blend?
Well, we don't use REITs. We do use ETFs, real estate ETFs, in place of REITs. I have bad taste in my mouth for REITs. I had before I formed Money Matters. I was in business for a short period of time I had a partner, fortunately died of brain cancer. And he was very, very big on REITs, and we had a lot of exposure as a firm to REITs, and it was a very bad experience. And these were traded REITs. We didn't deal with non-traded REITs. But the point is, we had a bad experience, and so I talk about backward looking. Well, I'm paint that one on me. I'm guilty.
Right.
So I don't. But no, we do look at factors, not merely. We do look at factors. We're very big on palladium. We were interested in copper and gold. I'm not a gold bug. I can't tell you that I am. We were very early on some alts, but we want to be careful about that. I guess I'm more tried and true. I'm not. I'm willing to take a chance on a smaller company. My view is that people will always pay for cash flow and growth, even if they talk a game about value. Not all of us are as deep-pocketed as Warren Buffett. Was very interested a couple of months ago when Buffett, in a very candid interview, said, and this is also interesting, I thought. He said, I've probably done 300. I haven't had 300 major trades. He said, but only 10 account for my success. So there you go. I mean, I thought that was a very, very candid statement, but it's consistent with what I found in looking more deeply into how Microsoft is another example. That's a single company. I mean, what's the diversification there? Not now. I'm not talking about what they're doing now. I'm talking about from the garage on to huge success. I'm not sure I fully answered your question.
I mean, do you ever look at including options in your asset allocation modeling, or is it not something?
we do, but pedestrian from your point of view, puts on the VIX, covered calls. That's pretty much where we stay. That's not a really great. That's not a really great approach. I like to read the options article in Saturday's Barron's every week, but I assume that half the literate world is reading that as well. So I mean, it's like an to me that column is like an algorithm that everybody knows and has no value, but maybe that's unfair to the right.
I think to the extent you're using any options, you're miles ahead of many firms, because we're big fans. And the whole podcast name, Know Your Options, is sort of alluding to the idea that it's just another tool that's worth looking at. But thinking of tools, maybe
I agree with you. I don't think we use them. I don't think we use them enough.
Well, it's interesting. They're a complex tool that does require, a significant amount of experience and education to apply properly. But my favorite thing to talk about options is to just, express that it's a contract. And if anybody's had a good experience with an option contract, it's at someone else's expense, and vice versa. Financially, if you've had a bad experience either owning or selling an option contract, it means someone else had a good outcome. Because it worked against you and worked for them. So it's not the options contract's fault. It's just it's a highly skilled tool in delivering one thing to another.
I don't actually agree with your description entirely. I mean, I think it's the most in my mind, it's the only asset class that'll do exactly what you wanted to do, exactly when you wanted to do it, presuming you've placed it in that position to do what it is you wanted to do.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I think it's the only asset class that behaves as expected. Bonds you think are going to be the stable asset as time goes by, and yet you have a year like last year where who would have thought you could lose 28-30% in a government bond? I mean, it's beyond it's almost beyond the realm to even imagine such a thing could happen. And who would think that we've had situations where stocks have blue chip stocks, be it a Kodak or be it a Xerox. I mean, we have terms called Kodak moment, or we have making a Xerox of this, and these are companies that one would never have dreamed of could possibly go out of business or be filing bankruptcy at some point in their journey. And yet here we are. And so, but an option will do exactly what you want it to do, exactly when you wanted to do it. And, I find that so attractive, so incredibly attractive. But anyway.
Well, let's wrap up with maybe one last question. Are there if you had a wish list of something you could change in an industry, or, a product that doesn't exist, or a process or a piece of education that you could toss out there and change the shape of the landscape? Anything floating around your head that you'd really have a wish list going for?
I would very much like to see something about money taught to kids, at least by the 8th or 9th grade, so they have some appreciation of money, how hard it is to get it, keep it, to hold on to it, to enjoy it, and not that it's something that the allowance that mom and dad gives you, or the little summer job working at at a chain store, whether it's a pharmacy or whether it's food or whatever it is. I think people come in and they're really illiterate about money, and someone said, I don't really know who said it. I know who's saying it now. I just don't know who said it originally. But education without action is meaningless. It just means that smart people continue to do dumb things with their money. And I don't know who the original person was who said it.
Larry.
No. David Blanchett says that all the time, but he didn't. I'll credit him, but I know he didn't invent it.
Yeah. Well, we've had a couple of guests. One of them was with a Foundation for Literacy here in San Diego.
Yeah.
And they're on an excellent mission to give back to the community and do educational services. And believe it or not, they've had some difficulty getting into some schools, which is just it's mind-boggling that that's the case. But the other ideas would be so much easier. I'll put out one just to share. It'd be so much easier in this country if we started funding for retirement when children were born, rather than asking the workers that are currently working to pay for the ones who are already retired. It's just so much more expensive in that process. If we could get our arms around a methodology for that.
Social Security was always a Ponzi scheme.
Right.
Exactly. Ponzi schemes work when you're in and out early. The problem is when you're hanging around, it is a problem. Yeah. And
exactly.
I do a lot of Social Security planning as part of my process, as you would think. Yeah. And I just find that there's an overemphasis on the disappearance of the defined benefit pension plan, because that was never a panacea. I mean, that's just a media, invention. People do have to take it in their own hands, and that puts a burden on people. It's easier not to.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to wrap up with the Ponzi conversation. So is there any other question that maybe we could have asked you that you would have liked us to have asked you?
Well, I think it was education was the one I think in. Well, anyway,
that was mine.
Well, if I had my druthers, I would create a retirement vehicle, a savings vehicle, but it doesn't have to, return 7%. I mean, if you started at age 3, 4, or 5 at 3%, it would be perfectly fine, and just put money into it, whether it's the money that you earn selling, newspapers, put some of that, or you don't have to have any business acumen, that lemonade stand, on the front lawn, whatever it is. I mean, if you could start people at a very early age, it would make a difference. And the only other observation I would make is that any combination of these late in life Social Security or pension plans, whether it's in this country, whether it's in Canada, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, none of them work. I mean, they are fundamentally flawed. The positive that I will give you was that a number of years ago, I worked on the Social Security. I was part of the team that worked on the Social Security form of the Chilean Social Security system. And we introduced exposure to the equity markets and to the US dollar. And it was very, very successful. And, politicians, cash flow is king. So now they ended that system some years ago. And now they're back to a system that is underfunded and overtaxed. Pretty much our own story.
Well, Fred, Saide, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being a most excellent co-host.
That's my pleasure, Larry. Thank you for hosting.
All right. Hope you all have a pleasant day.
Thank you.
This interview also may contain statements that constitute endorsements of measured risk portfolios, also known as MRP. Please note that any such statements are not made by clients of MRP, but by representatives of other investment advisory firms that work with MRP. No compensation was offered or given in exchange for these statements. However, a conflict of interest exists due to the incentive to give an endorsement in the interest of a good future working relationship between the endorser and MRP.